Hey there, this is Gardens and Graveyards, and my name is Charisma. Today we are at the cemetery that I manage, and I thought it would be interesting and fun to just do a little Q&A on the most common questions that I get asked as a cemetery manager. And while this channel is not really all about me being a cemetery manager, it is kind of the background of why I have this channel. So just a little background, my professional interest lies in horticulture and human services, and that took me down a journey that brought me into cemetery management, which is where I am today. And this is my office, and it's in Newport, Oregon, on the Central Oregon coast. It's not very far from where I live, so it's easily accessible. It is a pioneer cemetery, and it was established in 1879. We have a little over 7,500 burials here, and we are currently operating, which means we continue to have burials. As a matter of fact, we had a casket burial today. And while we are not as active as a large city cemetery, we do have an average between 5 and 8 burials a month. And yeah, that's kind of what's going on here in a nutshell. We have a mausoleum, we have a niche wall, and we have pioneer sections and new sections, and I'm sure I'll share more about the cemetery itself as time goes on, but today I just kind of wanted to answer some basic questions. I have 10 questions that I've accumulated through the last couple of years of being a cemetery manager that people ask me all the time. So I feel like I'm kind of in a shadow. I'm going to see if I adjust. I think that's a little bit better of lighting. So we'll go with that, maybe. Okay. Well, you know, it's February, so, and we have some snow threatening, so it seems like the lighting from my windows are coming from, you know, it's like really bright on one side and then it's dark on the other, and vice versa. Anyhow, let's just jump into it. I have, I've written down the questions. They're behind me. Okay, so the first question is, what is a cemetery manager? And a cemetery manager manages cemeteries. We are just like any other manager. My background is in management, so I've managed fitness clubs, I've managed restaurants, I've managed retail, and that's kind of the gamut of what I've managed. Different stores and different restaurants and that kind of thing, but those are the three basic things that I've managed, as well as just like project management within companies as well. So as manager, if you're not familiar with what a manager does, basically we do payroll, we do scheduling, hiring, firing, promotions, you know, HR stuff. We make sure that all of our office supplies are, you know, updated and available for our employees. We do a little bit of sales, we do a little bit of PR and marketing, inventory, all those types of things. And it's just that every industry has their own market, right? So if I was a restaurant manager, I would be making sure that we had as many potatoes as we would need for our customers, and I would make sure that I had all the staffing that I needed for that particular day. I just do that here. I make sure that I have casket liners, and I have my tractors are running well and, you know, functioning and everything like that, and I have employees that can run those things. So it's basically the same thing. It's just a different industry, and it you know, people hear the word cemetery manager and they get kind of like, oh, what are you doing there? So that's what a cemetery manager is. You're just managing an industry, and it happens to be a cemetery. Now, what's the difference between a cemetery manager, a funeral director, an undertaker, a sexton, a mortician, and a gravedigger? These are all roles within the funeral death care industry. So I explained to you what a cemetery manager does. Now, funeral director is a little bit different. They run a funeral home rather than a cemetery. Now, what's the difference between that? A funeral home is where the deceased body goes to be taken care of. So they get embalmed, they get cremated, they get cared for right after death. And that's where you would buy maybe your casket or your urns. You would make decisions about how your loved one is going to be buried or cared for in their after their life is over. And so a funeral director manages everybody underneath those roles. So they would manage morticians and undertakers, and they would make sure that you had all the embalming fluids you need, that you would have your IV tubes, and that your crematorium was operating efficiently. They would be in charge of those types of things. I don't have a funeral home here. I just have a cemetery, so I don't have to worry about those things. The other thing a funeral director will often do is be in charge of funerals. So if you're going to have a funeral service, more often than not, a funeral director would be the one that actually directs the funeral, facilitating the funeral. But they also will make sure that coordinate and make sure that there is someone, if they're not going to do the performing and you're going to have a pastor or a community member up there talking, they would make sure that they came in a timely fashion and that drinks were available, and they kind of coordinate the party, right? So, and they get you there on time, they get you out of there on time. They usually will follow the casket from the funeral home to the cemetery. Sometimes it's the funeral director, sometimes that's the undertaker. Now, the undertaker is the person who goes to your home or the hospital or the place where your loved one passes away, and they remove the body and bring it to your funeral home. Oftentimes, those are the same people that will take it from the funeral home, take the person from the funeral home to the cemetery. And they are different than a gravedigger, where some cemeteries have both. The role is both, and or they'll do the undertaking position and they dig the grave. But in our cemetery, since we don't have a funeral home, we don't have an undertaker, but we do have a gravedigger / groundskeeper. So that person digs the graves and closes the graves, and he also maintains all the lawns and the trees and the shrubs and everything that's on our property. He also does building maintenance and road maintenance, and as well as setting all of our markers in the ground. So he has a really broad umbrella, but he doesn't actually work with the body. A mortician, on the other hand, is a person who actually deals directly with the body, and they will be the one that embalms the body or cremates the body or prepares the body for a green burial or whatever it is that the family is choosing to do with the body. And they are also the ones that would apply makeup or put clothes on the body if the family chooses to go that route. So that's kind of like the difference between the different roles in the cemetery. Now, there's a broad range of that. There, if we were a bigger cemetery, there would be salespersons and, front desk people and janitors, and just like any other company that has multi-layers. We're a really small company, so it's just me, the manager. I have one groundskeeper. I have one secretary / assistant who pretty much runs the show. She is fabulous, and I would be lost without her. And then we have a board of directors, and our board of directors is all volunteer. Right now we have, I think, 6 people on the director board, and they help us make decisions about the cemetery. So, and the next question I get asked a lot is, what's the difference between a cemetery and a graveyard? And I know my channel is called Gardens and Graveyards, and it's because I really love the charm of a graveyard, even though I'm a cemetery manager. Now the difference is a graveyard is directly attached to a church. And back when cemeteries were first being implemented, especially in America, but also in England and other countries, the cemetery would be where, or the graveyard is where when someone would pass away, you would go to the spiritual leader and they would help the family and the deceased transition into the next chapter. And so you would naturally go to your church and have your church leader. They would pick up the body, they would bathe the body, and they would take care of the body and bury the body. They would preside over the body during a funeral. And then they would continue to maintain the grounds and care for the, eternal peace of the grounds of where the body was laid to rest. And then as America grew, they started needing more space for burials. And so they created cemeteries. And cemeteries were put out on the very far reaches of town, and they were maintained by individuals, caretakers that wore all the hats, and they maintained the cemetery and dug the graves and picked up the bodies, and they wore all the hats. And so because our towns grew so big and so fast, we virtually have no graveyards on the West Coast. I mean, it's really rare to see a graveyard or churchyard. They were also called churchyards. That's a synonymous term, churchyard, graveyard. But cemeteries are usually non-denominational. They are not biased, and they're open to the community to bury the dead. Now, there are specific niche cemeteries where it's like a Catholic cemetery or a Jewish cemetery, and those definitely exist. Our cemetery is not one of those. What do you do? That's like my number one question. What do you do all day? Do you dig graves? Well, certainly not all day. We're not that popular. Thank goodness. And I don't actually dig the graves. I have a groundskeeper that digs the graves. He's fabulous at it. He's quick, he's efficient, and it's just super precise. I'm very proud of my groundskeeper's skills. But I can dig the graves if I have to. I know how to operate the tractors, and I have dug urn burials on several occasions and buried the urns on several occasions, which is basically like digging a hole for a big tree. So we hand dig those, and so yes, but no, that's not what I do all day. My secretary / assistant, she insists on being called a secretary, but she's really an assistant, and she's really the right-hand man and the heart of the cemetery. She's been here for almost a decade, and she knows the ins and outs of all of it. And she takes care of everything. She does all the roles, except for burials. And I really just make sure that she's doing her job in a timely manner. And I also work a lot on records, and that has been my number one priority since I took this position 2 years ago, is updating our records. Now, our cemetery is 143 years old, and so we have had many managers and many people come through this office and set new protocols and new ways to do things. So there's a lot of misinformation and mismatched information and pieces that didn't get seen through all the way. And so I've been walking through every single step of every single person that I can find and every single lot. So I'm walking the grounds, I'm checking the computer, I'm looking at their deeds, I'm looking at Find a Grave, I'm looking at Ancestry, I'm pulling their cards, and I'm making sure that our maps are updated and that all of those pieces have the same name, the same dates, and the same information, and anything that's like not like I can't figure out. I mean, usually if I can prove that a person whose name was Sam was Samuel, I just change everything over to Samuel. If I can prove it, if it's on their death certificate or their birth certificate, his name was Samuel, everything gets labeled as Samuel, and I might make a notation somewhere saying known by the community as Sam. But if I can't prove it, then I say may have been Samuel, or make some kind of a notation that records indicate that this person may have gone by this name or may have been born at this date. Certainly the earlier the births, the more like, well, they were kind of sort of born in the spring of 1899. So sometimes those records aren't super clear anyway, so I just make as many notes as I can and make sure it's all the way across the board so everybody knows where to find the information and all the information is the same, so it's not super confusing, because it is super confusing. So that's been my number one priority. My number two priority is also record keeping for military. So we have an extensive amount of military individuals on our property, and we want to honor them, and we have a big event most Memorial Days. Now, I took this job in March of 2020. Everything shut down, and so I didn't get to experience that heyday of Memorial Day on this property. And maybe we'll get back there, but it probably won't be this year. And but it has given me the opportunity to update all of our military records. And we have a lot of volunteers that come over Memorial Day weekend and place flags on all of our veteran plots. And so I updated all of those records last year so that it was easier to walk the grounds and find them all. But in my process of updating all the records for the cemetery, I have found more people in the military, so I have to update those records. So March 1st, I kind of cut myself off from all the other stuff, and from March through the end of May, I'm updating the military, and that's what I did last year too. It worked out really well. And so that's basically what I do all day, is I'm updating records, and I have added well over 100 names onto our database of people that I have been able to prove were buried here that we did not have any. Well, we had some record, like little pieces of record, but we didn't have records all the way through to our current database saying that these people were buried here. So it makes me really happy that I am doing this work, because it means a lot to me to honor those people that lived and chose to be interred here at our cemetery. Now, I also get asked, do I need a license to have this job? And yes and no. I didn't need to go to school to have this job, although there are college classes that you can take. There are for a funeral director and mortician. For mortician and in the embalming and all that, you absolutely have to be licensed. But to manage the cemetery, you don't have to be. You don't have to have any specific license per se. But then once you become a manager, you are obligated to be registered with the mortuary board of your state. So I am licensed to run a cemetery in that way. So a background check was done, and I have to pay a nominal fee and fill out a lot of paperwork, basically saying that I am responsible for the cemetery if anything goes askew. And am I licensed to officiate over funerals? Yes, I am. I chose to get my license to do that. However, I've not performed any funerals, and we have a fantastic funeral home that's literally next door to us that does the majority of our local funerals. And so there hasn't been a need for me to do any funerals myself, but I am licensed in case I need to, or in case someone requests for me to do that. Being an officiant for funerals also allows me to officiate weddings and baptisms. So maybe in the future it'd be really fun to do some rituals and be a part of the community in that way, but it just hasn't been a priority of mine yet. Is it emotionally hard? Yes, it is. I'm not gonna lie, it is emotionally hard. It's heavy and it's humbling when you work in this industry. You're working with families who are grieving, and you're working with families who are preparing for their inevitable death. And sometimes it's, all good, like people come in really early and they're healthy and they just want to make sure that their end of life care is taken care of, and they're doing what's called a pre-needs, which is you have to have a license for a pre-needs too. Which is basically people come in and prepay for all of their burial costs and administration fees and everything like that, so that when they die, their family doesn't have to pay for it. But for me to make that sale and put it into a trust, I have to be licensed for that, which I am. And so is my assistant, and she does 99% of them. So anyways, emotionally, yes, it can be very draining. And you just have to understand that what I'm doing is a service to the community. And I have to understand what I'm doing here is a service to the community and providing a service that they need. And sometimes that means holding space for someone who's grieving and helping them get through the business end of grief, which is rarely an easy thing for people to do in the midst of their grief. So, what else? Oh, what got you into death care? Why are you doing this? What are you doing here? It was a little bit of a process, and yet not very surprising. I've always loved cemeteries. My mom used to take me to cemeteries to picnic when I was a little girl, and it was my favorite thing to do. I requested, let's go to the cemetery to picnic. We would walk through the historical parts of it, the oldest parts of whatever cemetery we're in, and imagine what life would be like. Pioneer life has always fascinated me. Maybe that's like a Laura Ingalls, childhood thing. I'm not sure. I also grew up really close to a Confederated tribe, which entices me to think about living closer to the land and how did people live before the white man took over, and then how did the white man live before corporate America took over, and those things, that type of human psyche fascinates me. And so cemeteries are just filled with that kind of history. So obviously that's part of my draw here. The other thing is land stewardship and landscaping, and I've been to some beautiful, beautiful cemeteries, and I'd like to share them with you on my channel. And so I joined a Master Gardener program here in my county. One of the ladies in the Master Gardener program, her husband used to manage this cemetery. She invited me to a board meeting, and the rest is history. I joined the board, and within 8 months I ended up being the manager due to, unfortunately, the current manager being diagnosed with cancer and passing away. So I ended up taking his position, and here I be. What keeps me engaged really is the fascination of history. It's the honoring those who have gone before us and established this community and their stories that are here, and me digging them up and finding those stories again to be highlighted and to be honored and to just enrich my life and enrich the community's life with knowledge of what these people did to build this community to begin with. And that's what really keeps me engaged here at this cemetery. And then the last thing is not really a question that I get asked a whole lot, but it's sort of a broad spectrum question that I do get asked, and so I'm just going to address it. And it's, what does the role of a cemetery manager look like today versus what did it look like, you know, years and years ago, and do I expect it to look the same in the future? And yes, the heart of my role as a cemetery manager has been the same since the beginning of time and will continue to be the same to the end of the time. And the heart of the role is to hold space for grieving families and create space in the ground for the deceased, and to care for that ground into perpetuity so that they can be honored. And that's the heart of it. Now, what did it look like years and years ago? I did touch on it in the churchyards and graveyards. It used to be the pastor that took care of it, and they were a spiritual leader in the community. And then it progressed into a cemetery caretaker, which ended up having a big stigma on, you know, the unclean, working with the dead. It was often criminals that were given that position. It was often the outcast. It was the person who couldn't hold a job or keep a job. It was often an addict that was put in a position of, caring for the cemetery. And then as the city started surrounding the cemeteries and corporations kind of took over cemeteries, it became more like what my job is now. We're sitting in an office and making sure that everything runs smoothly. And in the future, I imagine it's going to be very much the same. There's going to be a push and pull of just how corporate are we going to let the cemetery be, and how much mom and pop are we going to be able to keep some of our smaller pioneer cemeteries. But I think the landscape changes. I think that's what really changes. It went from a graveyard, churchyard attached to a church, and then it went to the outskirts of town where nobody visited, and then it became embraced by the town, and it was right here in the center, in the heart of the town. And then as more and more and more people get cremated and scattered to the wind, the cemetery is kind of like disassembled, and less people come to the cemetery for, you know, birthdays and celebrations. They just come for a funeral and maybe Mother's Day, maybe Father's Day, maybe Memorial Day. But it used to be like the community would come here like a park, and that's kind of fallen away. And I hope that we can, you know, encourage our youth to come to the cemeteries and honor their past. But I think a lot of it has to do with, like, the disassembling has to do with our families are now so widespread, right? So many of our families, we used to, like, great-great-great-grandma lived in this town, and so do you. But now it's like great-great-grandma lived in New York, and my uncle lives in Wisconsin, and I have an auntie in California. Like, we're all over the place now, so there's not that, like, deep root in the community anymore. Not so much. And so I think that's a big part of why people don't hang out in cemeteries as much anymore. What I see happening in the future, and what I see a lot of people pushing in the death care industry and in society in general, are green burials. And that's going to change the landscape, right? Because now, green burials were a thing of, you know, ancients, like you just get buried in the ground. But then we progressed into caskets and embalming and cement boxes in the ground, that the casket goes inside of a cement box inside the ground. But I see that we're bringing it back to land stewardship, and we're doing away with some of those practices. And so I see cemeteries are going to have to embrace this at some point, and many have, and I'm really glad that they're doing that. We're creating spaces for green burials only, where it's there won't be markers, and there won't be it'll just all be a natural process, and it'll just be a beautiful garden to hang out in. And I think that I think that'll be a bigger practice in the future. And I have a lot to say about that, but I'm not going to get into it right now in this interview. But I just kind of wanted to address the fact that as far as my role goes, as far as cemetery management goes, the heart doesn't change. We're doing this. We've been doing the same thing for 200 years plus, and we'll continue to do the same thing for 200 years plus on the other side. So that's it. That's my 10 Q&A about being a cemetery manager. And if you have more questions, if you have questions that you want to know about being a cemetery manager, please put them in the comments below. I'd love to answer your questions. This channel is really just about touring cemeteries and touring gardens, and I obviously share my journey with gardening because it's something that I really love to do, and I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of cemetery management specific videos, but I'm sure there's going to be a smattering because it is a part of my life and it is what I do. And there are definitely some things that I'd like to advocate. I'd like to introduce you to some new ideas about you know, what it means to be a part of a cemetery. I'm looking forward to meeting with you again and having some more conversations like this. If you have anything that you would like me to discuss, I would love to hear what those things might be. And maybe we could get it on the docket. Because yeah, sometimes these are just like really informative and I get to kind of interact with you, which is really fun. And thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing and liking and ringing the bell, because that's how you know when I post a new video. And make sure you follow me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, obviously. And I will see you in the next video. But until the next time, make sure that you go and celebrate life today. I thought maybe you would want to take a little tour around the cemetery office. Because we're so small, it's just like my office and the main office and the kitchen bathroom area. But maybe you've never been inside of a cemetery office and you have no idea what, you know, like what does that look like anyway. So I'm gonna flip this around and just kind of show you what it looks like here. So you can see we have file cabinets, and these have all of our contracts for our clients, obviously, and then, you know, all the other regular paperwork that you might have running a business. This is one of our maps. I thought I would just have it out here to show you kind of how intense these maps can look. This is in our original section, and you can see all the different types of handwriting throughout the years. And, you know, all the corrections that have been done, and how our roads or erosion and roads have come up so that some of these lots are no longer for sale. Just 143 years of, you know, things happening in the cemetery. And then, of course, we have just our, you know, basic office stuff. And lots of files, more files. This is where we keep our maps in this thing. These pull out like this. See? Woo. And then they just slide back in here like this. And in here we have our cards. And just like an old-fashioned card catalog, where we have old typed information. Sometimes there's more information, handwritten, and, you know, more modern cards with more information on them. And then we have what I find very cool, and I spend a lot of time in this drawer, but these are the very first books of our cemetery. And I just love opening them up. They smell like old books, and this beautiful, beautiful handwriting, right? And they have records of the burials, when they were buried, what their name was, where they're located, how much they paid. So that's really special, I think. Of course, over here I have my, just sort of like my message board of things that are going on. These are the different clipboards for our employees, and quick notes, and you know, things going on. Then this is our main office where my assistant / secretary sits there, and all of the phone numbers and sales information all posted up there. And we have these really cool things filled with notebooks of everything that we need to run the cemetery. And then we have a little bit of a sales area. These are the vases that get placed in with our markers. These are some urns we have for sale. These are the tiles that are available, the color samples of the tiles that are available with the monument company that we use. And then we have some more urns up here on top. And then back here, of course, we have the state and federal employee information. And this is just basically like our little kitchenette, restroom back there. And we just have it for, you know, our excess stuff. We're always putting, our bird feeders are here, but we're always getting glass vases. We do not allow glass on our cemetery, so whenever we see them out on the grounds, we pull them and clean them out, and when we get an excess stock, we take them to our local florist and let them reuse them. This is just our entryway. That's the door, obviously. When you walk into the cemetery, you're going to notice there's some basic information for the community. You can join the board of directors. You could sign in as a volunteer. You can sign up with the Fred Meyer Community Rewards. Here's a little bit of history about this cemetery. You can adopt a veteran headstone. There's some more history about the cemetery, and then some maps about the additions and where you can find your family members. We have a little board and staff photo board there of all of our staff members and board members. And then we have a couple of photo books of, you know, things that have happened in the cemetery over the years. We have the original deed to the cemetery here, and some old maps of the plotting of the cemetery. Basic stuff that you'd find in offices, except, you know, these are pertain to cemetery specific, just like you would find like specific OSHA rules for restaurants or, you know, that type of thing. And then this is my office, and so we're back in here. Those are the cabinets I showed you before. You know, yeah, just, I don't know. And that's my desk. And this is one of our trees on our property, which is pretty magnificent. And yeah, I don't know. There's not much else to say about that. So that's it. That's my office. That's the cemetery office. If you were to come here on the grounds and come find us, this is where we are hanging out. And thank you so much for checking me out today. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.